Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's doing great this evening. My name is Jaleesa Tucker. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and we are going to have a very important conversation tonight. Some of you may already know Indigenous women and women of color are disproportionately impacted by domestic violence. In fact, a study by the National Institute of Justice found that Indigenous women were 84% more likely to experience violence in their lifetime, and over half of this group will experience violence by an intimate partner. So this is a very important conversation for One Love to have, and I like to think that this conversation is just one of many as we begin to sort of unpack this issue and how it affects this particular community. Tonight, we're actually going to be joined by none other than One Love CEO Katie Hood. Some of you may already be familiar with Katie from her TED Talk, as well as Carolyn Hartness. Carolyn has worked extensively for years with Indigenous populations. She's also a Native woman, and she's going to be giving her perspective on this issue, you know, why Native American women are disproportionately impacted by it, and what we can do to stop abuse before it starts. So without further ado, please bear with me and the noise while I bring Katie and Carolyn on. And please show some love in the comments, please. Carolyn to join. Let's see if we can get her on. And Katie. Hi, Carolyn.
Hello.
Hi, Katie.
Oh my God, it's working.
It's working. Thank goodness.
All a little nervous, Jaleesa.
Me too. Definitely. Before we jump into this conversation, I'm wondering, do you both want to just go around and briefly introduce yourselves and give the audience your preferred pronouns?
Sure, I'm Katie, I'm she, her. You guys know who I am. And I got involved with One Love because when Yardley Love was killed, her cousin was a friend, and I wanted to help her family do anything they could to change the stats and norms around abuse.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Carolyn Hartness. I actually have issues with the pronoun thing. I always list myself as a human being. I think there's enough divisiveness in the world, but to each their own. And I'm just delighted to be here. An important topic for everybody.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for joining me on live. Like I said, this is a very important conversation for One Love. And I kind of just wanted to start at the beginning for those of you who don't know. One Love educates people about the 10 signs of healthy and the 10 signs of unhealthy. And I was hoping that Katie could sort of give us a little background about how we sort of boiled down these big patterns of abuse to these 10 signs.
Yeah, sure. So the research done by domestic violence experts around the country shows that the abusive relationships follow a pattern, and it's pretty well established and it's fairly consistent. And when Yardley's families first started understanding that this might be teachable, these patterns might be teachable, they got really excited about the opportunity to get ahead of the problem by sharing information that anyone can benefit from. As we started to do the work, we realized when I took this job, I remember saying, 1 in 3 women will be in an abusive relationship. People would say, what does that mean? And I would say, well, it could be physical abuse, sexual abuse, or emotional abuse. And more than one person said, what's emotional abuse really? And I think that's when we realized that there was a real need to define what emotional abuse was, because it's the opportunity, it's the place most of us will see unhealthy behaviors in our own relationships or in others. It's what's been normalized, sometimes in our families, sometimes in our media that we consume. And if we could really be more specific about what emotionally unhealthy behaviors are, and then conversely what healthy behaviors are, but specifically if we could teach emotionally unhealthy behaviors before they become abuse, people can get out or get help when they need it.
Totally. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Carolyn, you don't need to know all 10 signs of healthy or unhealthy, but I am wondering, how do you see some of our signs of unhealthy behaviors showing up in your experience, and some of the unhealthy patterns you might see in some Indigenous communities as well?
Well, first of all, I want to apologize that I did make notes because there's just so much to cover. So you might see me looking over a bit, some notes. I don't want to miss anything, but I went through the 10 unhealthy signs, and I was looking at issues of alcoholism, drug abuse, poverty, lack of opportunity, all of those things have something to do with it. And I was looking at specifically thinking about, oops, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Just looking at, you know, isolation, as I said, all of those things as parts of all the things we've suffered as Indian people. You know, we've lost land, we've lost children, we've lost sovereignty, we've lost culture and language, just to name a few things. And so even though these, you know, that relationships are really at the core of most Indigenous communities, and I've worked all around the world, Aboriginal in Australia quite a bit, Maori in New Zealand, First Nations in Canada, and many, many tribes here in the United States. And I find that that's a common thread to Indigenous cultures, that family is really important and children are extremely important. But when you pile on all of that trauma, drug abuse, neglect, all those things, even though we continue to want to have strong families, we want to be good parents, these things all get compromised. And then you add alcohol and drugs and neglect, violence, all of those other things into the mix. And what are you going to have? You know, those 10 signs, I could give examples from each one as I look through them. So another thing too, you know, the isolation and sabotaging, the gossip, lateral violence, we call it in Indian country, because we want people to recognize how dangerous that is. And the belittling and the deflecting, you know, those are really fueled by the disenfranchisement, especially of our men. And we have actually have a high rate of abuse among our Indian men as well as Indian women. So, you know, traditionally our roles were really defined and we were respected in those roles. There wasn't one person was better than somebody else in the tribe because of their role. Everybody's participation in what their role was extremely important. And without it, the tribe wouldn't survive. And, you know, our teachings basically are all about equity, that everybody is equal in that circle. And a lot of this, all of this meaning and application, I think has really been lost with the loss of our culture and the loss of language particularly.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And, you know, I do want to kick it back to Katie. I'm wondering, you know, because I did start the live saying with those stats about Indigenous women and knowing that Indigenous women, trans women, and women of color are more likely to experience abuse. I'm wondering what you feel the pandemic, what kind of impact the pandemic has had on people who are most vulnerable to this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest way to think about it is the pandemic definitely affected all people in abusive relationships. You were isolated, cut off from sources of support. There weren't we heard from a lot of teachers who had concerns about their students that when they couldn't see them every day in class, know that they were okay, they just felt like they'd been really cut off, able to be supportive in the way that they wanted to be. So we were cut off, and isolation, as we've already talked about, is a big factor, part of abuse, and it also can increase abuse. I think that there's also so many stressors going on in people were losing jobs, there's so much uncertainty and anxiety, and that can amplify bad situations. And certainly for folks that are in greater risk communities, you're going to see more of this happening as a result, and it's going to be much more potentially common. So I think what I would say is that the pandemic affected everybody, but it's really important for us to be focusing on making sure that our tools and resources can reach every community, not just one or another. So at the end of the day, this is human. What you were saying, these relationships are human. And I think that we all need help, but at-risk communities need it even more.
100%. And, you know, Carolyn, you actually just started this, you were just talking about some of the risk factors as a result of disenfranchisement that perpetuates relationship abuse in Indigenous communities. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of touch on now some of the systemic issues that might create barriers for people seeking help from relationship abuse, whether it's men or women.
And also, I just want to make sure that people understand that I am speaking from my own experience in my life, that I cannot speak for all Native people. And it's extremely important to understand that tribes differ tremendously from tribe to tribe around culture, language, resources, all kinds of things. And, you know, in the state of Washington, we have tribes on the west side of the mountains where they have more access to resources than on the east side, which is much more rural. And, you know, trying to get some help out to the Yakima Nation might be more difficult than, say, the Suquamish Reservation where I'm living right now. And so I also just want people to recognize that I cannot speak for all. Yeah. So lots of things under this question. So, you know, until the expanded version, and I have to say that I tried to really look up what's going on right now and got a little confused around the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act that was passed in 2013. And, you know, then it said for the tribal courts, and not every tribe has a court. There are 566 federally recognized Native tribes, and we have 10 unrecognized just in the state of Washington here that do not have courts. And most of those people do not have any jurisdiction also over non-Native perpetrators. And one of the things that was I think surprising even to me was that the majority of perpetrators are non-Native in these situations. That and also we have to worry about statistics because it's very, very common in the women I spoke to, and you know, I watched a few videos on YouTube, women speaking about it, that they have very little trust in the police, in the justice system, and many actually who had been raped and many other things had called the police and absolutely no one responded. And so this history of not having people care about our situations has kept a lot of the information hidden. So when we read these statistics, I have to think, wow, how many people are not reflected in these numbers? And I know that there are organizations that are trying to get police departments to add Native American as a box on the report forms for domestic violence as a way of then finding more information so that we can have real statistics. So I wanted to kind of tell a little story, also in the fact that this has become a federal issue, you know, so can you just call your local police, or is this really something that you should be calling your federal people to deal with? And what's the reality of the feds showing up in Pine Ridge, South Dakota in a timely manner, if at all, to look at these situations? So anyway, locally here in Washington, one of the tribes, the Tulalip tribe, one of the members, Deborah Parker, who's also been a former member of the tribe's board of directors, and today works as a consultant and speaker on social justice for Indigenous women. So she says, you know, when she was a little girl, a non-Indian extended family member sexually assaulted her and kept assaulting her until she was in the 4th grade. And she didn't report the crime much until later, and her abuser was never prosecuted. And that has a lot to do with how these laws are about not being able to prosecute non-offenders. And I can't just talk about DV because, you know, sexual assault, domestic violence, kidnapping, disappearing, missing women, and murdered Native women. I mean, this is like just a ball of problems that are hard to pull out and separate. So it's very difficult just to talk about DV, and also, again, because we don't have all these numbers. She says, sadly, she heard many stories like hers over the years, which of course included DV stories, and that, like her aunt who was raped by 4 men some 20 years ago on the reservation, she tried to seek help and was told that she needed to return and report the crime to her tribal government. Well, sometimes that's a really difficult to do because you might have relatives of the perpetrator on the tribal council, or that is on the police department or in the court system, whatever. The National Institute of Justice did a pretty big study, and that's where I got a lot of my statistics. And they said that 1 in 3 American Indian and Native Alaska Native women are the females, 38%. So more than 1 in 6 American Indian women were unable to get services that they needed after incidents of intimate partner violence. Well, that's not teaching anybody around you in your family or in your community that you're going to get help someplace, you know. So confusion over who has jurisdiction to investigate and prosecute these crimes on the reservations is a continual barrier to address the violence. She says that many reservations are remote and resources to help survivors are far and few between, and that's very true. And then add to that the cultural differences that can stand in the way of some people seeking help off reservation. There's a stigma to seeking help on a reservation, and many survivors feel trapped in an abusive cycle that just has no end. And we're so connected to each other, even if we don't live on reservation with our own people. Indian communities tend to be pretty small, and it's interesting. In Seattle, you can, well, not so much anymore, but you used to be able to go to a neighborhood and it was defined by, oh, this is the Black neighborhood and that's the Hispanic neighborhood. There never has been Native American neighborhoods. Native Americans have been dispersed all over the place, and usually you find them in low economic areas where the economic status is pretty low. Yeah, there's a lot more to say. I don't know what else to say.
Because I think a huge goal that we've had from the start is, yes, we want to prevent, but we also want people to know where to go for help. And so we frequently refer nationally to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, our Love is Respect, but we've also partnered with the Strongheart's Native Helpline, which is a resource that is really designed to help people in Native communities struggling with these issues. So I just thought I would mention that here. We've partnered with them in the past.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Another thing too about not leaving the reservation is that your family is there, and people just don't feel comfortable. I mean, you know, a lot of Native people have been said to be prejudiced, and I guess in a way we are, but it's been around all these experiences that don't make us feel safe. So I think it's more than, you know, hating or all of that. It's, I think, much more about safety and just fear and not feeling that you'll be respected or believed, I think is a huge thing. Like this woman, Parker, said that there was absolutely no education on her reservation around this kind of thing. And she, in a month, had what was called the Healing Week, where she was featured as a speaker, and she was talking to students about domestic violence and sexual assault. And I know, and I know that, well, I'll talk about it later. I have something else that can respond to that too. She said they have no idea, says Parker. She remembers when she used to run a girls group, a young woman disclosed that her friend was being abused. The woman in question denied the claim, saying her boyfriend never hit her. He only dragged her around by her hair. Mm-hmm. So people just not understanding what is abuse. You know, what does domestic violence really look like? So it says studies show that due to issues like violence and abuse, Native American children on reservations suffer post-traumatic stress disorder at roughly the same rate as soldiers coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, what kind of a future are they going to have? What kind of a relationship are they going to choose? How, are they going to have enough self-esteem to deal with issues as they arise that might put them at risk? You know, so this is why Native American experts are urging Congress to close the loophole in the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act that doesn't cover children in allowing tribes. And another thing that brings up is a lot of women are not going to call, I don't know if I said this already or not, but not going to call because they might have somebody come out and see what's going on in the home and take the children.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know, and I mean, I have an adopted daughter, and this has been a situation with her too. You know, she's terrified. She lost her first 3 kids because she had them as a teenager and, you know, was using and not connected to me at the time. And she has 4 more now and is terrified that if anything happens to bring attention to her, that the kids will be taken away.
Yeah. It's so interesting. If I could tell you the number of people I've talked to in unhealthy or abusive relationships who that is a main fear that keeps them in their relationship. And that's all women. That's all people, or all people that I've talked to in these situations. There's this profound fear of losing their children, losing access to them, or potentially their children being alone with their, if they get custody split up, will their kids be alone with their abusive
Right.
ex? Really?
Right.
I
And
do.
go ahead.
Oh no, you finished.
Well, I just was thinking in my own life, I totally forgot about this because I'm so old, but when I was in my early 20s, my first really serious relationship started out really well, and then he got involved in alcohol and drugs, and it went downhill, and I left, and he came over, he found out where I lived and came over and tried to talk to me, and I took him outside because I didn't want him in my apartment, and he actually attacked me in the street. And so I went to court to get a restraining order. And, I was working at the University of Washington. I had a good job. I had, no criminal history, anything like that. And I had to go to court like 2 or 3 times. And the judge more than once said, well, you don't look damaged. I don't see any injury.
So that's exactly what we need to change. It's like this. And when you ask the first question about the 10 signs, like if we can validate that emotional abuse is abuse. And honestly, the research shows that the long-term effects of emotional abuse, they have a longer-term mental health effect even than physical abuse in many situations. So, but it's been sort of invalidated as this soft area when it's just absolutely not. And you bring up a good point about the need to educate people throughout the system about what abuse really is and what it looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And I had dreams. That guy disappeared out of my life. I had no idea what happened to him for decades, and I still had nightmares, even within the last 10 years, that he would find me and kill me. And through a long, crazy story, we got reunited, and he had been to prison for murder and a drug deal, and then got educated, got a degree, got a chemical dependency degree as well, and was working in a women's shelter, a treatment center, helping women, and was married and doing very well. He told me, he said, I'm working through the steps, and you were one of the people I thought, talking to her again might re-traumatize her. And so I just pray that she's forgiven me. But actually seeing him, talking to him, took all that away. And so really talking about these things is important, and trying to have restoration is important. And you may not be able to face your perpetrator, but at least having a voice and letting other people know what you've gone through, that, because there's that shame thing, like, well, what did I do? And little kids have the same thing. Why do they think I'm a bad kid? What did I do?
Right.
Well, the same thing obviously comes up with domestic violence, rape, sexual assault, all that stuff.
100%. And first off, thank you so much for sharing all of that, Carolyn. Katie, I'm wondering, because Carolyn brought up this really great point about people not even knowing what abuse looks like. And she gave that example about someone grabbing someone's hair, and you would think that's something that's super obvious to a lot of people, but if you have no education at all, then it's not obvious at all to you. And so, Katie, I'm wondering, what do you think One Love's role is in underserved communities, and how do you think we can help stop abuse before it even begins?
I mean, I think that just taking it a level up, the whole idea is we do have to have these conversations. We need to name what's going on. We need to teach kids early that even if they're experiencing it in their homes or seeing it in the media they consume, like, there is a different way to be. You need to get that idea out there, and you need to plant the idea out there that there should be no shame in asking for help, because shame, this is an issue that thrives in the dark. It thrives when no one's talking about it. It thrives in secrets. But the more we can normalize people talking about this issue and finding strength in each other, the sad truth is so many of us have been victims at one point in our lives. So there is solidarity in being able to find and support each other. But that's not what we've done generally. Then when you talk about what's our role in underserved communities, or in any community, our role is to be a resource. Our role is to work in partnership with communities to understand their needs. And when we do hear very frequently that many communities they don't have a language for this discussion, and it's not a normalized discussion. So right away, that's an entry for us, because we can share our tools and resources with them, so they don't have to recreate the wheel. And that's really the core of our model, is how do we create a resource that young people want to engage with, that any community can use. But you can't underestimate it. It's a it's a real partnership. We have to learn, what are the real needs? What's the nuance of serving the community? Some of the context that you gave today, Carolyn, is super important when you're thinking about working with a community that has experienced abuse as a community, you know, to an extent, not to an extent, as a matter of fact.
Historic.
What are the layers of intergenerational trauma that are contributing to the situation folks find themselves in? And what are the stereotypes? I think sometimes there's stereotypes about at-risk communities that those people are just worse or something like that. That is just not the truth. And you have to have a more nuanced understanding of what has affected folks to then be able to use our tools to help in some way. But our tools are one piece of the puzzle, is what I would say.
And you know, thinking like, it's kind of obvious to most of us what unhealthy behavior is, right? But many situations in Indian communities which have this intergenerational trauma and domestic violence and all of that, this behavior seems normal or at least acceptable, which is, I've run into that conversation over and over again. And again, like you say, really doing that educational piece of what is it? I always say to the women I work with, are you cherished? And they're like, what does that word mean? Well, you need to learn. Look it up in the dictionary.
Yes, definitely. And Carolyn, I'm just wondering, you know, first off, thank you, Katie, for sharing everything that you just shared. I'm wondering, Carolyn, from your point of view, how can traditional domestic violence organizations do a better job at addressing the needs of Indigenous communities and keeping Indigenous survivors safe, really?
Well, this is an interesting question. And again, I think that has a lot to do with location as well. And transportation is always a huge problem, it seems, and access to money if you want to leave all that. But in the mid-90s, I facilitated this group in Seattle. They were looking, the health department and the University of Washington was looking at the question, would women be more likely to come to a domestic violence shelter if the people working there were like them, looked like them? Like, what if there was a Hispanically staffed domestic violence shelter, would Hispanic women be more likely to come there? So I did the groups for Native Americans, and it was at the Seattle Indian Health Board, which is just a few blocks from downtown Seattle, and where many, many sweet street women were living and living, yes, on the street. And we were paying them $30, and it was in the evening. So we got a lot of homeless Native women that came to the group. So it was supposed to be an hour group, and I would ask these questions in the beginning, and they would talk maybe 10 minutes and essentially say, you know, as long as I was safe and I feel respected, then I don't care. Which was kind of a surprise. Then they spent the rest of the hour, which went on into another hour in all the focus groups I did, talking mostly about sexual abuse in their life and the family and all of that. You know, so again, I say this is all tied up in so much. Yeah, I don't know. It's just having the ability to know about a resource, to be able to get there, and then to feel safe and comfortable. The money thing is huge. You know, you've got 5 kids, you don't have a dime, you don't have a car. You know, are you going to want to leave and spend what? You go to the shelter and then what? Are they going to hand you a checkbook? No.
Right.
Are they going to give you a job? No. I used to volunteer in a shelter, so I've seen the reality of it. And I've also seen women lose their children in the shelter because they lived in so much violence. This one woman had grown up with very, very abusive parents who beat each other up as well as all the kids. She ended up, of course, in a very abusive relationship. I don't know if I should say of course, but she did. And she had a 4-year-old daughter with her in the shelter, and she got so frustrated one day that she actually threw that little girl against the wall. And she loved that little girl, and CPS came and took the girl. And I mean, all of us, the staff, the other women, the volunteers, we were all just bawling our eyes out as that car drove away with that little girl. And I'm thinking, well, where's the healing going to happen for this woman? You know, now she's not only lost her relationship, she's lost her child, you know.
It's so easy sometimes to get overwhelmed by the magnitude of the problem that we're trying to tackle. And I like, that's a perfect example. That's a perfect example of a tragedy begetting a tragedy begetting a tragedy. And it's like, how is one educational program that teaches about the signs of unhealthy relationships going to help? And when I can go there. I can go there and sit there and be like, this is idealistic. This is, how does this begin to tackle these layers of problems? But then I think I sort of say, well, this is the shot on goal we're taking. If we get to young people early and present them a counter narrative of what things can be like, and we normalize them talking to each other and their friends about relationships, and really, if it's the shot on goal we can take and try, and if we can affect kids earlier in their lives, and we've gone younger. We started, I don't know if you know this, but we started teaching 18-year-old, 20-year-olds about this. Then they said, we love this. We needed it in high school. And the high schoolers said, we needed this in middle school. So we're going younger and younger to try to start planting these messages and this dialogue earlier. And I think that, we'll see. But I am 100% sure that in partnership with communities where there is trust, like, so when you have a trusted sort of local service provider or a teacher or whoever, and bring our tools, trust them and love them and they serve, the chances of success and the shot on goal is much higher. So I just want to, sort of emphasize that. It's just the authentic partnership. Nothing we do matters unless we partner authentically with the communities that we're working with.
Yeah, and you know what, that brings up for me a couple things. First of all, probably half of Native American people live off reservation. And also there's a flow back and forth that people live in town for a while and then go back home and so forth. And I'm on the Suquamish Reservation, which is a pretty open place. It's kind of a patchwork. I own my property on it, but I'm surrounded by native land and other non-native people as well. Then 12 miles up the road is the Port Gamble Sklallam tribe, where I work with their reentry program. And they have a history of people hardly ever leaving the reservation, where in Suquamish it's really, so it's a different animal,
Yeah.
And it's sometimes very difficult to put your foot in the door. It's not always easy to get involved with Native communities. And if you have a relationship with a Native program, like you mentioned earlier, I would definitely ask them to help you bring your information, your programming to the tribe, doing education with young people, because so many people are living in cities now, and getting those kids, Native kids, educated around this kind of an issue is important. Again, I think as long as you're coming from your heart and people feel safe and feel like, they're there, you're there for their healing, they're going to trust you. And sometimes it just takes a long time. I mean, I lived in Taos, New Mexico for 4 years, and the first year I went to everything at the Taos Pueblo, every fundraiser, every powwow, everything. And, no one ever spoke to me. And one day I was walking down the aisle at the grocery store, and an elderly couple from the Pueblo came forward with their cart, and she got next to me and she kind of stuck her lips out, which Native people tend to do, and nodded her head like, hey, and it was like, oh, wow. So the next time I went out there to some event, she called me over and had me sit with her family, and that began a relationship. But it took a year of me just showing up. But you have a product, you have something you can offer and say, wow, look, this is the kind of information that people need, and can you help me maybe make it more culturally appropriate? Talking circles are a great cultural, and actually talking circles are all over the world. Native Americans, I don't think, can blame them, but I think, I've done it with kids. I had circles of 3rd and 4th graders who were living with parents who were actively using drugs and alcohol, and one, I said, we need to have a sacred stone. And I let them all out of the portable and they flew into every direction. I thought, oh my God, what have I done? And then they're yelling, well, how will we know the sacred stone? And I said, oh, you'll know. And a little girl said, I found the sacred stone. So we came back and they would just get their little mats and put them in a circle. And these are all kids, many who had ADHD and fetal alcohol and all kinds of behavioral issues and neurological problems. And they would just sit there because, first of all, nobody ever really listened to them. And here was an opportunity to be heard. So one week, a girl came back from the ocean with her family that had been a good experience. And she had a piece of driftwood. And we used that as a talking stick. And eventually the kids all wrote their name on it. They decorated it with beads and feathers. And that was like a magic wand. If they were like spiders on the wall, I would just hold it up in the air and they would run, get their mats and get in a circle. And that was a real cultural tool and a positive outcome for all of them. Anyway, so
Awesome.
A lot to talk about in a half an hour.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you both for sharing. If anyone who has joined us now live would like to ask a question, please do. We're a little bit over, but I think we have time for at least one more question. And just wanted to ask both of you, Katie and Carolyn, is there anything else you'd like to share before we ended this live?
No, I just want to share my gratitude, Carolyn, to you for being here with us. I think that it's going to be this marriage. You said to me earlier today on the phone, well, I'm not an expert in this area. You're an expert in many other things, but it's the combination of expertise and community expertise that will actually help us make meaningful progress. So I'm just really, really grateful that you gave us your time tonight.
Well, and I'm just so grateful that you even came up with this idea. I can't tell you how invisible Native people feel in so many arenas, and to want to focus on our community is tremendous. And thank you so much. And I really appreciate all the work you're doing out there. And this is a national crisis.
Most definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I wish if anybody out there has anything to add or even tell me something I said that they don't really agree with, I would love to hear from anybody in your audience who might want to add to our conversation.
Oh yeah, I'm sure someone will comment or DM me something, some opinion they have about something we said tonight. And I welcome everyone's opinions. Please DM One Love. If you're interested in learning more about Carolyn, about how relationship abuse impacts different communities, about One Love's work, please DM us. We're happy to connect you with people who can help you get our workshops, our content into your community, into your schools. And yeah, we can definitely work something out. But if no one has questions tonight, you can ask me later if you want. In the meantime, I'm going to say thank you both so much for joining, Carolyn and Katie. I'm going to let you both go to enjoy your evening. Yay, Carolyn. Yeah. Thank you. Bye, guys.
It's the best.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you guys so much for joining our conversation. As I'd said, this is a very, very, very important topic for One Love to really unpack, and we're going to be doing so slowly but surely over time. This is the first of many conversations we'll be having, on our social media, during our lives, sharing content about Native American communities and relationship abuse in our stories, in our posts. So please, if you're interested in this topic, continue to follow One Love, share it with a friend, and let us know anything that you have on your mind about relationships or how, relationships specifically impact this community. Let us know, DM us, and we'll be happy to unpack that for you in a post in the future. Just want to give another shout out to the Strongheart Native Helpline. As Katie mentioned earlier, this is an organization, a national resource for Indigenous people who are in need of support and are leaving a relationship abuse situation, a domestic violence situation. They are amazing, and we've worked with them in the past, and we continue to partner with them today. So definitely something to Google later on. Thank you guys so much. For more information on One Love, please visit joinonelove.org. Bye. Thank you for joining.